Welcome to the Holy Crop, it's Farmageddon podcast. Today, joining Daniel and I, we have Andrew McMillion. Andrew has thrown his life in tech in the bin and turned his back on that and moved into soil health, seed saving, and decided to become more self-sufficient at home. He currently runs his own self-sustainable garden in a farm just outside of Oslo in the south of Norway. He's one of Norway's leading experts on seeds, and today we're going to be talking to him about his work with KVANN and the Seed Alliance, and also how to get started on your own garden at home. What are the things that you can do? How do you add nitrogen and carbon into the soil? How do you grow foods? What should you be growing? What should you focus on between perennial and annual plants? So we're going to be talking to him a little bit about that. He is a good friend of Stephen Barstow's, and Stephen is going to be on a later podcast. He's also going to be joining us at the Jord Festival. So we're going to be talking to him a little bit about that and some of the work that he's doing, EU-funded projects, cross-border work, and what's inspired him. So look forward to listening to that.
Let's go into it. Let's get into it.
So if we kick off, and I'd start by saying thank you very much for joining us, Andrew. We've been really excited and looking forward to this. Obviously had to reschedule it as well, but yeah, really excited to talk to you. Finding people with your knowledge, breadth of expertise and abilities is it's brilliant to have you along.
Thanks, Michael. It's been exciting for me as well. And when you asked me to join up on the Jord Festival, the Earth Festival, I was like, that's amazing. Just looking at the whole lineup that you have there with Richard Perkins and Andrew McMillion and Stephen Barstow, I feel very honored to be a part of that, and also love what you're doing with this podcast. So glad to be a part of it.
That's brilliant. And yeah, and we love the fact that you're so engaged, and looking forward to having you along as well. So especially straight after your honeymoon or your wedding rather. So that's perfect timing. That's a cause for celebration. Why not do it as a festival? Yeah. So it'd be great, Andrew, if you could just give us a bit of background. What were you doing? Were you always doing seeds and market gardens, or what were you doing before, and how did you get into what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm like an expat, grew up all over the world in Asia, Europe, and the States, and studied philosophy and anthropology. But there wasn't a lot of work in philosophy and anthropology. And back then, in the early 2000s, you could actually still get into tech without a tech background. You just needed to be somewhat savvy. So I kind of got into tech. I started working for Apple in Ireland first, and then I moved on to working for them in the States. And then for several reasons, I didn't really like the States that much, so I moved to Norway. I was lucky that I'm both Norwegian and American, so I could just do that. And did a good 10 years in tech and kept climbing and climbing. I kind of segued out of like tech proper and more into sales and management. But I always, because of philosophy and anthropology and also just the poly crisis, I always felt like I wanted to have some sort of a response to that and not just have a life that was focused on making money and, you know, just being a part of the society. I wanted to actually make an impact somehow. And I felt like, you know, we need more people to react. And I don't really believe in solutions. I think that's sort of not the right way to look at it. It's more about finding a good response. And for me, I looked a lot at the food system, and I felt that, you know, the food system's a mess. And especially the fact that everything is always about getting bigger. You know, it's this whole American mantra of get bigger, get out. And I started to think the opposite, get small and get in instead. So I got a small holding of a couple of hectares in 2009 when my son was born. And I was full-time employed in tech, so I had no time to do anything except just sort of fool around in the beginning. But gradually, you know, mostly by error over and over again, I realized that it's the soil that, like, you can try all kinds of stuff with plants, but it's only when you start getting into the soil and really understanding that, like, that right on under the surface, if you can master that, or at least, you know, improve it significantly, then it's like a totally different game. It's kind of like surfing, it's like you're paddling against the waves and then suddenly you turn around and you jump up on your board and you're surfing. And it's a totally different experience. And then you feel like, okay, wow, this is amazing. So I gradually sort of transitioned out of tech over the years and just kept working on, understanding plants, working with ecosystems on my small farm, set up a 300 square meter polytunnel, and just got really into it. My aim in the beginning was really self-sufficiency. But then I saw a documentary called The Good Capitalists, which is about the Norwegian oil fund and how they were invested in Monsanto. And Monsanto had like 300,000 child slaves in India working for them. So the ethics commission said, you guys should divest from Monsanto. But the oil fund said, no, we're going to do what's called active management and sort of try and work with them. So Monsanto spun off that, their child labor to some other Indian company and managed to stay, to keep their investment from the oil fund. But in the process, I was trying to raise people's awareness about this. So I created a gathering in Oslo at the House of Literature and invited lots of famous people, including Vandana Shiva, who's sort of globally famous when it comes to Monsanto and seeds. And so even though that was unsuccessful, I made this connection with her and her Navdanya, these 9 seeds that she has, this network of community seed banks all over India. And that really got me interested in seeds. So I felt like, okay, what's my response? Well, let my response be seeds. And in the beginning, I had no idea what that would mean, to be honest, because I was a tech person. I had no experience on farms. But I just started getting into it, and somebody told me, oh, there's this guy, Stephen Barstow, who just wrote this book called Around the World in 80 Plants. I was like, really? Yeah, he's up in Trondheim, which is like far north. I was like, how is that possible that apparently he had 7,000 accessions that he had tried out in his little backyard of like half a hectare. I was
That
like,
sounds like Stephen. Yeah.
it's totally crazy. I was like, how is that possible, right? And so I realized this guy is the nutty professor of seed saving and plant diversity. So I got to go up and visit him. So I did that. I traveled up in 2015 in November, which you would think is a terrible time, but for seeds, it's actually perfect. So I showed up there and he's just so welcoming. And he was like, so what are you looking for? And I had to like nail down about 30 to 40 plants that I really wanted from his 80. And he just goes into his Excel and writes a few notes down on a piece of paper and takes a tray and brings me out into the garden and says, hold the tray like this. So I'm holding the tray and it's like, those fast forward videos where they're like, choo, choo, choo. That's how it felt. I was just standing there and this wizard was like flying all over the garden. And he kept coming back with seeds and cuttings. And within about 15 minutes, he had all of the 40 plants that I wanted. And I was just like, how is this possible? And from that moment on, I was like sold. Like this is it, right? So I brought all those plants back to my farm. I started getting more into perennials, more into permaculture, but also I was like seed saving. I really want to get into that. And luckily I found this amazing polytunnel, which was used, and I set that up. And pretty much right when I set it up was like the 20th of May. And then suddenly I realized, holy crap, I've got to fill this greenhouse with something, right? And it's already the 20th of May. And I had a bunch of pumpkins. So I was like, okay, I just plastered it with pumpkins the first year. And that sort of got me into actually like big crops as well, not just perennial. I mean, you can get good crops out of perennials, but a lot of people when they go into the perennial vibe, they forget that like it takes years to build up a perennial collection.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, you also have to do the annuals. I mean, there's a reason why humanity is focused on annuals for the last 10,000 years. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning. And then, luckily, just by chance, Stephen Barstow came to our municipality in 2016 and was going to set up the Norwegian Seed Savers. So maybe I should say a little bit about what a community seed bank is too before I explain this, because globally, if you go back to like the Green Revolution in the 60s, what happened was that tractors had been, just growing and growing in agriculture for about 100 years. And they had gotten so big and so powerful that they needed to start breeding plants for machines, because before we had open pollinated seeds, which meant that every little village had their own varieties. And it was very often a grandma who was responsible to take care of this collection of that community's genetics, right? But then with the Green Revolution and the introduction of tractors, a lot of hybridization started to happen in the seed industry. And there's the trade-off. So the good thing with hybrids is that you get hybrid vigor. So you get more powerful, bigger, stronger plants. And also the first generation are very often uniform, which is perfect for machines. But the drawback is that you can't save seeds from them. I mean, you can, but what happens is by the second generation, F2, filial 2, by then they start to express their genetic diversity. And so then you get the opposite effect. Then you get a huge variety, right? Because it's like you hybridize two and then you got all this explosion of diversity. And what a plant breeder will do is then start to dehybridize. So by years and years of selection, they apply a genetic bottleneck and then they select exactly the traits that they're looking for. But your average farmer is not a plant breeder. So that means that most people can't do that. Most people are looking for that crop that year. So what ended up happening is that all of these small community shared community seed banks, right? They just started to disappear. And as the grandmas and granddads started to die off, we started to lose our diversity. And of course, America was ahead of the curve when it came to this whole industrialized revolution. And so America got the first wave of it. Luckily, a lot of indigenous elders and hippies, to be quite honest, in the 70s were like, we got to do something about this. So they joined forces and they created the Seed Savers Exchange in 1975. And that was sort of the beginning of a response to the loss of all of these cultivars. And that spread all around the world. Now, of course, you can say that this has always been going on. So it's not like, but the new wave of creating a new, like refocusing on community seed banks kind of starts there as a response to the Green Revolution. And so fast forward, over the last 50 years, you've had more and more and more seed savers, community seed banks showing up all around the world. And in Europe, we have something called Let's Liberate Diversity, which is sort of an umbrella organization for all of the 50, 60 community seed banks. And the Norwegian Seed Savers was then created literally just across the river from my farm. I was just that lucky that that's where it happened. And so I showed up and I was too busy to be involved, but I said I can be on the election committee. So I helped put together the first proper board because when you start off, you have an interim board. And then when we had the first proper meeting the next year, they pulled me into the board and I kind of been on the board ever since. Now, luckily, I'm no longer on the board, which gives me more time to focus on actually working with plants. Yeah, so that's kind of the story of how I got roped into this thing. But I feel very lucky that I chose this direction because it's something that's really needed. And people forget, that food security, you don't really have food security if you don't have seed security. Everybody's trying to learn how to become self-sufficient and what have you, but where are your seeds coming from? Globally, something like 70% of the world's seeds come from 4 companies, right? And in Scandinavia, we've really lost our own seed sovereignty over the last 30 years. I mean, it's really with industrialization. But if you go back to World War I, we had a proper seed organization here, and the state actually subsidized seeds for a long time. So we're kind of hoping that, we can get some more action in that area. And that's one of the things we're focusing on.
It's really, you've touched on some fascinating points there, because I think when it comes to food security, food has been so commoditized that, our association with food in reality is going to the supermarket and buying it and not really having the question as to, are the seeds that produce this genetically modified? Where does this food actually come from? What's on the labels? Are the labels accurate? There's all of those types of things. It's only really at times, I think, people probably started to realize during COVID when the shelves were a little emptier than they once were. And now with what's happening around the world, fuel prices going up, access to farming equipment or materials, chemical treatments, potentially threats to food imports as well. When you're so reliant on food import as Norway is, it's and you can't just turn around and say, well, we'll just increase food production, because it takes years to do that. And just a couple of points that you made, I think Danny and I have both looked at the small is beautiful concept as well, which you were talking about, which absolutely rings true. And when you're talking about Vandana Shiva, she in her book Terra Viva, she talks a lot about the Indian. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a great read, and she talks a lot about how the percentage of food that's grown from small farms is disproportionately higher than the amount of food that is grown per hectare on a large scale farm, and what can be produced, the variety, the local conditions, the seeds, all of those aspects of it, and how important the seed saving is. But yeah, she's written a book, The Nature of Nature, as well, which is also a really great read. And I'm looking forward to getting Stephen to sign a copy of around the world in 80 plants as well. But we're planning to have a podcast with him, and as you know, he's going to come and join us as well at the Yord Festival, and we're hoping to get a tour of his onion gardens and others. But it's just incredible what people like him have just done off his own volition, moving to Trondheim, setting up the gardens, and really being a bit of a shining light in that area. Really, it's not like he's got a background in that field. He's gone and made it happen. And he is the mad professor when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell his story because I'll leave that for the next podcast. But he's an amazing inspiration. But so is Richard Perkins and Andrew McMillion. These people that are coming are really shining lights. And I would say also that, like, there's so much about you touched on it also in that podcast that you sent me that you did about sort of the knock-on effects to local communities when it's all about getting big or get out. Because what ends up happening is, people leave small communities, and we've had this pendulum shift of 70-80% of the population working on farms to now less than 1% in the modern world. And my ambition, to be quite honest, is to move that pendulum back. I don't feel like the answer is more of this crazy direction that we've gone. We see the effects of all these machines. We see the effects on ecosystems. We see the effects on local communities. We see the effects on cities. And a lot of people are like, no, we need to leave the countryside to itself. We need these nature reserves. And I'm like, no, we need people who are deeply connected to ecosystems to connect and do good jobs and become stewards, because humans have the potential to be keystone species. We're probably the species that has the most potential to be keystone species of keystone species, which is not at all what we're doing today. We're just completely disregarding and just, destroying our own substrate. But if we can move that pendulum back in a healthy way, let's say we can move it, 10 times even. Let's say 10% of the population moves back to the countryside, but we do it organized. We do it with knowledge. We do it with diversity. We do it with seeds. And instead of thinking big, we think small, like what we're trying to do here on the farm. We don't want one farmer killing himself to try and manage the farm, which is what you see everywhere. No, we want, and we don't, and they can't even do it full time. They have to do it part time. So what's the point? What is the point of that system? No, we have a system where everybody contributes a little bit. It's not this is how Norway was before, by the way. Nobody just lived off of their small farms. They went fishing, they did some forestry, they grew their farm, they did everything, right?
Yeah, but
it's that whole jack of all trades and master of one. You had one thing you were good at, but you did everything. And that's what we need to go back to. It's a much healthier life to live that way.
But the local community also bought from the local farm as well. So you had local trade and
exactly.
Local commerce. And just when you look at the economics that exists in Norway, I find it really incredible. You think you've got the world's largest sovereign fund. Norway's making more money than it's ever made because of the oil and gas prices, and what's going on around the world. And at the same time, we've got communes wanting to close down regional schools, and there's a drive to push people towards cities and towns, this sort of drive to centralization. And we've got a disproportionate number of people that are employed in administration roles to administer more centralized services, but just with higher costs. And you you sort of think of the economic impact that has on local communities when you go to a centralized and globalized model. The ones that suffer the most are those regional local communities, but they're the ones that contribute significantly to the value of what you're growing, what you're doing, the environmental, the ecological, the social impact within the nation. So it's strange that the economic drivers don't fit with the cultural requirements that exist within the country.
Well, I mean, this kind of comes back to this famous book, The Unsettling of America. I don't know if you know it. This was written in the 70s. And basically what he shows in that book is that as America, I mean, first there was the settling of America, where it was all small farm or farm related. And the unsettling was when the machines came in and you had to get big or get out. And most people had to sell their farms, move to the city and work in factories. And we're still in that cycle. We're still in a cycle where people feel pressured to give up their farm lives and move to the cities. And that's a terrible dynamic. That's not a good, it's not good. It's not just not good for the local community. It's not good for us as human beings. It's not good for our food system. It disconnects us from ecology. There's so many negative knock-on effects of this model. And we need to find ways to respond to that in a healthy way. And I think that we have never had more tools to change the entire system in a way in which we can bring people closer to nature. And from my sort of the philosophical side of me goes back to Arne Næss, which is Norway's most famous philosopher. He was a deep ecologist. He coined the term deep ecology. And he was saying that the big problem that we have in our culture now is that we see ourselves as divided. We think culture, nature, but we're not. We are actually a part of nature. And when we create this false dichotomy between us and nature, and as machines gradually just take over more and more of our lives, we live this fake life that's cut off from parts of who we are. Like, what about having your hands in the soil? What about watching sprouts come up in the springtime? What about connecting to the insects, the pollinators, right? The deer in the forest. I mean, picking mushrooms, berries. This is the soul of Norway, right? This is not just Norway, the world really, but I mean, Norwegians are much closer to it because industrialization in many ways came late, right? We were a peasant society until we found oil. So my hope is that we can find new ways. I don't want to go back to suffering and, starving to death at the edge of the world up, close to the Arctic. No, Stephen Barstow says you don't need to suffer. You just bring a huge diversity of plants to you and you can eat as much as you want. You're never going to run out of food. Food is an abundant thing. It's not a scarcity thing. And that's what we should be focusing on, right? And the Norwegian seed savers are actually creating this, we're bringing back the diversity that Norway focused on before, because I don't know if you've heard about the potato priests in Norway, but if you go back to the 1700s, Norwegians wouldn't eat potatoes. They just didn't have any potato culture. And so the priests realized this is a really good crop, and they pretty much forced Norwegians to eat potatoes. Luckily, because you can see the population curve once potatoes hit Norway. Continue 100 years later, and there's this guy, Frederick Schubler, who was the head of the botanical gardens in Oslo from like 1850 to 1890. And he was kind of like Carl von Linné's light. Like he's like Norway's little brother of Carl von Linné's in some ways. Anyway, what he did was he got seeds and cuttings from all around the world, and he spread them all around Norway to priests' farms, because he knew that the priests' farms were the cultural centers of the local communities. And if he could get especially the priests' wives, if he could get them to take to take care of and learn how to cultivate a diversity that would be good for Norway. And he wrote 2 books about this, right? And so in 2018, the Norwegian seed savers were like, this is amazing history that we have. Let's restart Schubler's network. So we restarted it, and now we have 77 farms all across the country. Some of them are the old original Schubler's gardens, and some of them are not, but they're all focused on diversity, and we're all linking them up through this living lab that we call Embla, which has the ambition to rekindle this flame of like, well, what can we do? Let's play around with diversity. Let's make these little hubs, these seed sanctuaries in all these different communities. So that's like the seed of like going back but forward at the same time. Like, we know so much more than the Frederick Schubler did. We have access to so much more genetics. We know how to clean the viruses out of plants that like potatoes and onions, right? So let's try and find a way to build a new culture that's celebratory, that brings people together in local communities around a diversified ecosystem. And that's a part of our heritage as well. So it's I'm super excited about it. And now we're also linking that up with living labs all around Europe. So we have several bigger projects that we're doing in agroforestry as well. So I'm working on this project called Root to Fork, together with the Technical University of Munich and Novia School of Applied Sciences in Finland, as well as Agrosyntropica in Portugal, which is focused on syntropic agroforestry, which I can touch on later. But basically, it's like, how can you restore degraded lands? And I don't know how much you know about Portugal, but it's totally degraded, right?
Yeah,
it's
well, they
desertified.
they went into I'm trying to think of what forests they were growing there, but they've had terrible forest fires and stuff through the destruction of natural forests there. And is it echinacea or something they were growing there? The trees, I can't
Could
remember
be.
what.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not
what
certain.
they
But
were.
in any case, it's decimated, you know.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and they've had some, and it's insane to go there and just see, and you get places like Malaysia is a prime example of one where they've stripped out the jungle and just replaced it all with palm oil trees as well. And
Exactly.
you fly over there and doing jungle treks and it's just palm oil and stuff. But just to go back to the seed network, I mean that's a fascinating project and a very timely one as well. So have you? I'm assuming there's a website people can go and find their local or nearest seed savers, their local seed bank. So where is that? How do people get involved? Can
So
you just go
it's
out, buy seeds? Can you exchange seeds? What's the process?
Yeah, so it's KVANN, KVANN.no. And KVANN is the Norwegian word for Angelica archangelica, which is our sort of symbolic plant. But it also it's an acronym. It stands for Kunnskap og vern av nytteplanter i Norge, which means knowledge and protection of useful plants in Norway. So
Okay.
you go on there, and what we have is we're organized in guilds. So if you're interested in pumpkins, join the pumpkin guild. If you're interested in fruit, join the fruit guild. If you're interested in nuts, you get the picture. And then we have the Schubler's Hage, which anybody can apply to become a member of Schubler's Hage, which is just Schubler's Gardens, right? And it's not totally separate, but it's a separate organization in some ways because it's linked up to a lot of all these historical farms, right? So that's a sort of a bigger network, and it's also our living lab.
So who sort of manages that? So is that managed at a local level? They're managing the local seed banks, I'm assuming.
Well, each farm has its own subculture. So some of them, like the one that I live on here, we own it. It's privately owned, but that's the exception. Most of them are still owned by the church or something called Opplysningsvesensfond, which are the ones who sort of have managed the church properties in Norway for hundreds of years. And some of them have been turned into associations. So it's a big mix. And each one has somehow applied to become members. And then we have a board that manages the whole umbrella of Schubler's Hage. And then on top of that, there's the board of KVANN that manages the whole thing. But we also have the ability to trade seeds because we don't have the right to sell seeds. But we cooperate very closely with Solhatt, which is the Norway's only organic seed company. We've been closely tied to them for many years. And so that's where we buy seeds, and that's where I advise people to buy seeds if they want to produce. But what we are is a community seed bank. So people get confused. When I hold talks, I say, we're not a membership organization for people. We're a membership organization for plants. So when you join up, don't ask me what, you can do for yourself, but what can you do for seeds? That's what I'm interested in. So when I hold my 4-hour courses, about the 9 plant families and everything you need to know about seed saving, my aim is to get people from seed saver to seed steward, which means that you're able to do a good job to take care of these old varieties of plants. Right. And that's what we're aiming for. So if you join us, don't come in and try and order your year's seed from us. That's not what we are. If you take seeds from us, we expect you to reproduce them. Now, having said that, only maybe 15% of our members are able to do that yet. So that we have a long way to go. And we're not trying to discourage people. So join, get seeds, grow them, but take the course on seed saving and try to become a seed steward. Try not to just save seeds, but try to learn enough to become a seed steward, because we need to not just learn how to grow our own food, but we need to learn how to save our own seeds.
And for those interested in courses, I'm assuming they're through the KVANN website as well, are they?
That's right. You can just contact us, or you can contact me as well. I do a lot of seed courses, especially for libraries, because libraries have seed libraries very often, and also for something called Hagelag, which is like gardening associations, but also for other organizations, schools, and at events and that sort of thing. So if anybody wants a seed course, they can contact me, and we'll see if we can fit it in.
You've seeded that nicely.
Thanks.
I just got aware of a dig called the Ohalo dig. You heard of that one?
No.
It's close to in Israel. It's very close to. They found organic remains, which they claim that they now can plant potatoes from seeds instead of having the sprouts. No.
Wow. Yeah, no, there's something called true potato seed. That's how you breed new potatoes. So potatoes have flowers and make seeds, but it's like, that's why I'm saying, like, take a course, because you need to know what you're doing with seeds. Some seeds are super easy to save seeds from, and some are super hard. In my course, I start with the super easy ones, and then I move down to the more and more difficult ones. But true potato seed, that's another game. Like, that's not for your average person. Most people grow potatoes from potatoes still.
Yeah, that's hardcore potato growing.
Yeah, next level.
Brilliant. Andrew, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in your market garden, and how you started on that, and what your learning curve is, because you mentioned that your aim was to be more self-sufficient whilst you're still working in tech, and I think that's the reality for most people, is they have a full-time job trying to grow a few things here and there at home, and it's a bit of a challenge. So how do you start to plan your own garden? What should you do? How do you know if you've got good soil? What kind of conditions do you need? Do you have because you mentioned as well about perennials, and obviously perennials are great long term for delivering consistency. They tend to be, you tend to get a lot of stuff. Like if you look at apple trees, all your apples come at once, or plums are even worse. You get tons of plums, and then suddenly you've got a preservation a challenge ahead of you as well. So how do you design? How do you manage it time wise, and what's your story around that?
Okay, so I don't live on the farm that I lived on when I joined the Norwegian Seed Savers, but I'll sort of give that story from beginning to where I am now. So like I was saying earlier, it was really difficult until I figured out soil. And then once I got a greenhouse, I realized with a microclimate, you can do everything. And I diversified as much as possible. Those are all key. You need to diversify. And in the beginning, you plant all kinds of stuff. Everybody does this because it's so much fun. But then there's this rule, 80-20 rule, which is that 20% of your plants give you 80% of your yield. That doesn't mean you should ignore the last 20%, right? But you do need to master those 20, right? So if you have 20 plants that that you can survive on, great. Once you mastered those, then play around with all the other stuff, right? But find out what those are for you.
What's that 20% for you then? Where, I mean, you mentioned pumpkins to start with.
I say I identify as a pumpkin. You know, that's like I am more pumpkin than anything else.
Well, you don't look like one, if that makes you feel better.
You know, you can't, it's not what's on the outside, bro. It's what's on the inside. And my heart is totally pumpkin. Yeah, so pumpkins, but there I have my own breed, Melting Cup, right? Which is Norway's only locally adapted pumpkin. I can get into plant breeding, that's like next level, but basically your question is what are the 20? Well, what I grow is like, okay, I'm like you've got the perennial side and the annual side, but if I start with the annuals, it's going to be pumpkins, potatoes, onions, brassicas, all the brassicas. But I like brassicas you can store. So I want to, at the end of the season, I want to have tons of food in my basement so that I can make it through the winter. That's how we always did it. We always had that. We would dig a hole in the field, usually, you know, a big one, and then we'd build up a bunch of stones, put a little roof on it, and everything in the field went into that house. And then you went out there every time you needed something and took it out, right? And then after a while, we were like, okay, let's move that into our basements, right? So that's my thing. So brassicas, it's really cabbage, kale, I don't like broccoli so much because it always seems to go to flour, but cauliflower, Romanesco, rosenkål, which is Brussels sprouts, right? And the thing you have to remember, which most people forget, is that when you're doing monocrop, it's easy. You've got machines, you've got it all timed, it's one thing. But when you're doing a diversity, it's about waves. So I wrote an article called Ecosystems Resonance, which is about learning to align yourself with your ecosystem. Right? It's like I was saying earlier, when you're surfing, you're like paddling out and it's, you know, you're getting hit by waves, and it's always like that in the beginning. This time of year, waves are coming over you and you're trying to keep these little baby seeds alive, you know, the baby plants alive. And you're like, when should I get them out? When should I get them out? But getting them out is like, if you get them out the right timing, it's just like jumping up on a surfboard and then off you go. Right? And so you need to learn that. So you need to master the waves, and farming is very wavy, which is beautiful because you literally become a part of your ecosystem, right? So what I do is I like, once I have the microclimate, the greenhouse, I have a startup in the basement with some grow lights, but very minimal. They're just to open the bottleneck to get out into the greenhouse because I have an unheated greenhouse. Then it starts wave after wave. So, you know, what should you plant in February? What should you plant in March? What should you plant in April? What should you plant in May? And what should you direct seed, right? And the further north you go, the more you need to pre-cultivate it, right? So it's tricky. And I can't like give you, you know, I hold courses all year round about this stuff, you know, so we don't have time now for me to get into the details, but basically think about it like waves. And also the same thing goes for harvesting. Try and find plants that you can harvest in waves. Like with pumpkins, they do kind of come in waves. There's the first wave of females, and then there's the second wave, and then there's the third wave. And if you time it right, you can catch all three waves if you're lucky, right? But most people only catch one or two waves, right? So it's really about timing. It's about sensing. And sure, you could do all the science and the tech, and I've done all the soil tests to, you know, but that was for me more to prove that knowing how to feed soil, knowing that, you know, it's the soil bacteria and, you know, the food soil web, as Elaine Ingham calls it, right? If you know how to feed that and you know how to build that, then your plants will thrive. They won't be eaten by insects, right? So yeah, those would be my main sort of clues and tips. And then do the perennials, build them up. The nice thing about perennials is, at least like onions, they divide themselves every year. So every year you've got like 10-fold or at least 5-fold from one, plus they go to seed. And so you can scale up perennials really quick once you start building up. So we have so many perennials now that we're never run out of perennials. Right. And we're at the point now where we're like expanding from the garden level to the field. We got 2 hectares. And this whole multi-strata agroforestry idea is that you take these perennials and you put them in between the rows or in the rows of fruits. So we have 500 apple trees and 1,000 black currants and 300 or honey berries and 200 aronia, right? But we're going to add multi-strata. So the first strata is all the herbaceous perennials, but then we've got nuts, a nut strata, we've got climbing strata, we've got a medicinal strata. So in the end, you've got, instead of just having 2 hectares of fruit, you've got fruit, nuts, herbs, seeds, you know, and you have you're out competing all the perennial weeds because it's just totally stacked. That's the dream. But of course, it takes time to get there. And what we're doing also is the scientific work around, well, how does this work, you know? So we're both working with tech to see, okay, how does the plant health, how is the soil health, right? But then I'm mostly focused on teaching, how can you see it? So when I teach kids, for instance, I'm like, you can see an unhealthy plant. Most people can sense if the plant isn't healthy. But what do you do? Well, there's certain signs that will tell you it needs more nitrogen, right? Well, what color is nitrogen? And that's what you guys just did. People don't know. People have no clue what color is nitrogen. Well, nitrogen is green, right? So if you look around your ecosystem, everything that's green, that's full of nitrogen. Well, you cut down the green and you put it around the plant, and that nitrogen leaches into the soil, and the soil puts that into the plant. Boom, you've got more nitrogen, okay? Now, what if you have some other issues? Generally speaking, my advice is to use 2 layers. Right? You've got the brown layer and the green layer. So I say you've got to paint your ecosystem healthy. You take a layer of carbon, brown, and then you take a layer of green. And if you have the right balance between carbon and nitrogen, which is about 1 to 25, 1 to 30, so 1 part nitrogen, 30 parts carbon, that is literally, if you look at compost, that's what you're aiming for. Your compost pile should be that. Well, if you're doing that micro on the surface of your plants, those things together break down really quickly, and that feeds the soil food web. So it's super simple. You need to get access to leaf, and you need to get access to green. So what I do is, when I plant a field of, let's say, 2,000 square meter market garden, I'll do another 2,000 square meters of clover, right? Why? Well, because clover, it's a perennial, more or less self-seeding, right? And it's nitrogen binding on its own, right? It has a special symbiotic relationship with microbes in the roots that create its own nitrogen. So you don't have to give it nitrogen. So that field is sorted nitrogen wise. And what do? You cut it and you put that nitrogen onto your beds. So you've got your nitrogen source. And then I work with churches, and they just dump all their leaf that they collect. Truckloads of leaf just get dumped onto our farm. And we just do it. We just lay out the wheelbarrow out, with woofer power, layer out leaf, layer out green, right? And you never want to have the soil be visible. It's like your skin, you don't want to have a cut on your skin. So that's why this whole no-till thing happened, right? It's like, well, we need to protect our soil, which is true. But I say low-till. It's like no-till. Well, that's a bit extreme. I don't like, I'm fundamentally against fundamentalism. So, you've got some till, but minimal till, right? And the tilling is really just until you can get rid of the weeds. Once you get rid of the weeds, then you just keep it covered. And if you can keep it covered, your aim is to get a canopy. You want a canopy. You want no light coming to the ground. Why? All those weed seeds will sprout from the sunlight. They're photosensitive, right? But as soon as you have that canopy, that's why pumpkins are amazing, because they form an amazing canopy, right? So your aim is, how quickly can you do maximal photosynthesis on your whole field, right? And until you do, can you cover it with something living or something that just died? And the just died that's carbon is leaf, and the just died that's nitrogen is grass or clover.
That's some really good tips there, because I think that was going to be my next question, is what are your tips for soil health and for managing it and monitoring and knowing if you've got good soil health. But I think just those tips alone, I think the other thing I really like about clover is that they're one of the first things to flower in the garden, and the bees go crazy for it as well. So they're really good for the pollinators to start them off. So it's clover's great from that perspective.
And if you look at the history of permaculture, you've got Masanobu Fukuoka, who wrote One Straw Revolution, and he was a huge huge clover lover. That was like one of his main go-to plants.
Yeah.
Of course, there's something called right plant, wrong place as well. And there's something else called don't be a moron, which is if you have enough, don't put more on, right? So you need to know what to put where. And that's an art form. It's like that's the painting, right? How do you paint it? Well, everybody's an artist. Some are not very good artists and some are
Yeah.
amazing artists. So that's where your skill set, that's where you evolve gradually. But you should look at it like a canvas. You should look at it like, I want this thing to be beautiful. So I have big, huge boundaries around the edge with sunflowers and cosmos and amaranth, which is a big signal to the deer life and everything else is like, this is not a normal ecosystem. Stay out, right? It's like, it's intimidating, but the clover is there. Oh, go ahead, have as much clover as you want, but don't come into the, I call it the cosmos, the cosmic boundary. Like don't come into my cosmos. This is for us. You can take the clover, right? But knowing all these things, value the edge. I say this is all permaculture, right? I say the edge is the center to make that even more important. Like people really, it's a nice little, value the edge. No. The edge is the center. If you look at ecosystems, the most diverse parts of ecosystems are where ecosystems meet, right, with other ecosystems. And if you think about the evolution of life itself, you've got the symbiogenetic event, right, 2 billion years ago, when mitochondria and the cell wall. Without the cell wall, the mitochondria has got nothing to do, right? So the edge is the center, right? And what you plant on the edge becomes the center. So you have to.
That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, you need to change your perspective, and that's what's needed these days, I think.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the market garden that you run with your soon-to-be wife. And so are you now doing that full time? And what's your market? Are you selling food to shops or excuse me, in the local community, or how are you making it work?
Well, actually, things have evolved. So I ran a market garden on my last farm, and then on the Segway farm, because I got divorced and had to sell my farm a couple years back. But now I don't run a market garden. Now, because I have this idea of get small and get in, I want to collaborate with other people in the area. And we have an eco village just up the hill here. So one of the eco villagers is the one managing the market garden. I'm mentoring her, and I have a small seed operation that's a part of that market garden. So we collaborate, we share the 2-wheel tractor, but I'm moving on to the orchard. So I'm doing this multi-strata agroforestry. We got 2 hectares of fenced off. That's what I'm doing now. So I hold courses. My wife Malin runs the retreat center here at Hurdal Guest Farm, Hurdal Gjestegård. So we do silent retreats, we do yoga, we do breath work. We have saunas, we garden walks, forest walks, that sort of a thing, and events, weddings and all that sort of thing. You can rent our farmhouse. It's the old priest's house, right? So we only own the house and the gardens, which is, half a hectare of gardens. But then I have a contract, 10-year contract for the orchard and the market garden area, and also a food forest playground that we're building together with the Steiner School, which is just across the river. So we're setting in slack lines and zip lines and, making it fun, and then putting in food forest plants in there so that the eco village kids, when they walk down to school, they can take a little zip line and eat some berries and fruit on their way to school, that sort of thing. And that's also Stephen Barstow when he lived here. He had this whole vision of creating this food forest garden here. So we're just sort of continuing using his plan. But basically, it's half a hectare of market garden, which luckily there were pigs there last year, so they've eaten up all the quickgrass. So we took a soil test, and it's like we don't have to do any fertilizing for about 5 or 6 years. In fact, we are going to have to plant a lot of pumpkins to eat up some of the nitrogen that's out there. But so I'm helping her establish the market garden, and I'm focusing on the multi-strata agroforestry. And then, of course, we have our perennial collection, right? So like the perennial collection I've been building up for many years. It started when I visited Stephen Barstow, but now I've got like gankao, which is medicinal licorice. In fact, the first ever sprout, I believe, of medicinal licorice just happened a few days ago. Because it takes many years for them to flower and then go to seed, and it's not every year, But finally, after building this, it's a very difficult plant to cultivate. But now we finally got not just seeds, but sprouts. So those are always milestones when you've, worked with perennials for a long time and you've got locally adapted seed. Then you're like, wow. But some of the other plants, I'm literally probably have like 500,000 seeds of Codonopsis pilosula, which is poor man's ginseng. And that we use in our portals in our garden. And then, of course, thousands and thousands of alliums. Stephen Barstow, he's known as the extreme salad man because he has the world record in the salad with the most diversity, but he's also really famous for onions. And he has a huge collection up there in Trondheim. So I'm kind of made a small version of that here, just a huge amount. And we're going to be putting a lot of those out into the agroforestry over coming years. So we're really at a sort of a phase shift here where we've gone from I've gone from market gardening to where I'm more sort of teaching, and we're more sort of managing and helping other people get started, small projects, right? We're still, in fact, looking for somebody who could, take on the chickens, because we're like Richard Perkins. We believe in making small farms work, but we don't think that one person can make it work. We need groups of people to make it work. And instead of having one person own the whole thing, well, why don't you do a business? I do a business, you do a business, you do a business. We all work together. We have a little farm store. Everybody can sell at the same store, right? And this is an idea that's not new, actually. If you go to like Korea, they have this whole network there called Hansalim, which has like 2,500 small farms in one network. They have 200 of their own stores. They have their own seed operation. They've been doing this for 50 years. In fact, we sent Thomas Snellman, who's another guy. He said, I talked to him yesterday, by the way. He's the guy who started at Equitings, and he's interested in coming to Julefestivalen as well, because he actually doesn't live too far away in Finland. He's like on the Trondheim level. But anyway, we sent him to Hans Salim a couple of years ago, and he was just blown away. He's like, this network. So we want to have that kind of a network in Europe. Why not? Why not change the whole food system? I mean, I don't know if you've heard of Reformaten in Sweden, but they have this lady, Olga, who started that. She has this saying, she calls it the super bad markets. And ever since I heard that, I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm going to call it from now on. It's the super bad markets. And she's like, we don't want to sell our produce in the super bad markets. We want to sell our produce directly through Equitings or through our own stores. We need a whole different system. It's not about ostracizing. It's just that, if you're going to try, like you said on your last podcast, Michael, if you're going to get a contract with, Norwegian-American or whatever, they're going to strangle you, and we don't want to be strangled. And we want to have liberty. We want to be free. And if we have small people coordinating together, we can do it in a completely different way, So don't try and compete with them, reinvent the whole thing. And that's what we're trying to do here.
There's I'm sure you're aware, an expression in tech sales, which is dancing with the devil. Yeah. And that's, when you get into the bed, you have a bad contract, you're literally dancing with the devil. And I think that's the challenge that you face. But it's also, you mentioned the oil fund earlier, and what they're investing in, and you sort of think the links between the oil fund and Bovir, and some of those types of initiatives, and how much of the market is driven by big conglomerate investment decisions rather than the small is beautiful. What's right with regards to plant nutrition, plant health, soil health, human health, all of those aspects versus yield and corporate results and shareholder returns that you see in big supermarket chains or super bad market chains.
And also just look at what the super rich do as soon as they have enough money. What do?
Yeah,
they create gorgeous gardens where they're eating their own produce, and they pay some gardener to do all their work for them. So they get it.
Yeah.
But there's no money in that.
Yeah.
And just to let everybody know also, there is no money in it. It's not a money thing. You're not doing it for money. I mean, I make half the amount of money that I did when I was in tech, but I'm healthy. I mean, I can show you my blood. I can show you my blood before and after, and it's like night and day. Like tech blood is not healthy at all, but organically fed, or hands in the soil, that is healthy blood. So what do you want? You want to be stressed out and work 80-hour weeks and fly all over the world and die when you're 40, or Do you want to give up some of your freedom and your money, which isn't really freedom, and start growing your own food and be a little bit more independent? I think the other option is way better, and I think more and more people, especially from tech, understand this and are moving in that direction.
So I've heard that by 2050 we're expecting, like the way the trajectory is going now, 80% of all humans will be living in cities. You said that you want to inspire for more community-based, smaller living scale, as well as exactly why you're on this podcast and why we're doing your festival. How do we make sure that it's only 70% if you're going for the 10% aim that you talked about earlier here, that ends up living in cities by 2050? So, and second question, which might tie into this, is how big is your operation? You're talking about all these seeds, all these perennials and annuals and everything. How many people you got going on?
Well, I'll start with the second first. Right now we have a woofer group that's here. We always have woofers pretty much, except for like Christmas time. Other than that, we've got woofers. So anywhere from 1 to 6 woofers at any given time. But then we also have happy helpers that show up, eco villagers. And then we've got Svenja, who's managing the market garden with her husband, and so I don't know, anywhere from like 5 to 15 people at any given time. But like I said, it's not I'm not employing anybody. Svenja has her own business with the market garden. I have my own business with the Malin has her own business with the retreats. We each have to, it's like in an ecosystem. You find your niche and you have to manage your own niche. You can't mess up your own niche. If you don't mess up your own niche, you're not in the ecosystem anymore. And that's kind of our rule here, is like, come, get involved, but don't come with a vision and an idea and nothing to back it up with. That's a million people have ideas. You have to be willing to put your money where your mouth is and say, okay, I'm going to dedicate half the year to being a part of this crew, and I'm going to take this chunk of work, right? I'm going to take this part of the farm and I'm going to do a good job with that. And that's going to help the rest of the ecosystem, because I'm going to bring in eggs and chickens and I'm going to rock that. And that means that more people want to come to our farm, because they're going to be able to not just get vegetables, not just get seed, not just get plants, not just get fruit, not nuts, medicine, the yoga, but also whatever they're bringing to the table. Somebody wants to come in and start growing mushrooms, let's say. It doesn't matter. That's the whole thing with Richard Perkins as well. He's trying to show there are so many opportunities, and when you stack functions, which is a permaculture principle, you get so much more out of it, right, than if you're just doing one thing. So this is, again, flip it. Get small and get in, right? Think, how can you work with your hands? How can you work seasonally? Well, isn't it amazing that we live so far north where half the year you can't grow anything? That's amazing. That means half the year you can do something else. Well, if you want to lower your footprints, you get yourself a van and you head down to Portugal for the winter. You take half the year off, and then you come back up and you rock it again in the summertime. Or you have some other job that you do, and you just let everybody know, well, I'm not doing that during the season. During the season, I'm in work. So that, we got to think differently. We really do. And what was your other question?
How will we make sure that it's only 70, not 80% of people living in cities or big cities by 2050?
Well, that's what we're working on. So everybody has to come with their response. My response is that I want to create vegetable sanctuaries, and not just me. This is the job of Seed Savers. We need hubs, right, where people can do this work. But there, I'm also thinking differently. Instead of just having one, why don't we have networks? Why don't we have market gardens linked up in a network? So now here we have Sulat, which is very close by. They have all the tools. They have the ability to sell seeds. They've got that mastered. Okay, how do we add all these little market gardens all around? Each one does 1 or 2 varieties. Wow, suddenly we have a network that can feed into this hub, and we're suddenly more self-sufficient in seeds. So that's like, on the longer term, I would like to see people get inspired. I would also like to see the state bring back the subsidies for seeds. Like, why don't we have subsidy? I mean, it makes no sense. Like, we should have, and better subsidies for market gardeners, right? Small scale. So what I want to do is help strengthen the market garden network. I want to make it more attractive for people to get into this business. and to make it functionally stacked so that people understand, well, when you buy from the super bad markets, you're supporting all that crap. But when you buy from us, you're getting not just locally adapted seeds, not just healthy ecosystems, but you're building community, right? And that's the way that we're going to do this, is to inspire people to live differently.
Just as a side, not side, but just to let people know how dire the situation is. What's our seeds sovereignty in Norway at this point?
0.5% on vegetables. That's where we are now. And that's horrible. But then think about it. To get to 1%, we've doubled it. And we can do that in 1 year. We can do that in 1 year, right? So it's like the exponentiality in this business is massive. You have to think about it like that. Instead of thinking about all the terrible things that the world, there's so much crap everywhere. Well, don't focus on that. Focus on how you can make the world just a little bit better. What's your response to it, right? And that gives you joy. That gives you health. That builds community. So that's at least what I choose to do, because I have to admit, I've been seriously depressed about the state of the world. I mean, it's not easy looking around, and so many people are, right? But like when Corona hit, I had the best time. Why? Well, I had seeds. Everybody wanted seeds. I had plants. Everybody wanted plants, right? So I was just like living, and I didn't have to go anywhere. I could just be on my farm and grow stuff. So it's like the future is asking for what we're giving. And I believe in it. I think it's going to be amazing. Now, there's this idea from a physicist called Ilya Prigogine, which I'll mention here as well, because we mentioned syntropic agroforestry in the beginning, and most people don't know what that is. But syntropy is sort of like the tendency for things to converge, whereas entropy, second law of thermodynamics, is things fall apart, right? And Ilya Prigogine has this beautiful quote. He got the Nobel Prize in physics in the 70s, and he says, in a sea of entropy, when things are falling apart, that's where the seed lies for the emergence of a higher state of order that you couldn't imagine from the system before. And that's the story of life over and over again, right? Like I said, the symbiogenetic event, the fact that we're talking, the fact that we're on screens here, these are emergent properties on emergent properties on emergent properties of syntropy, of things coming together. But most people don't think in those terms. They don't think entropy, syntropy. And I think that's an important lens as well, right? So like look at your ecosystem in terms of how much entropy are you causing your ecosystem and how much syntropy are you bringing to it, right? And so I think that this whole seed saving market garden network is a part of the syntropy in the sea of entropy that's coming. And it's bad, but it's going to get worse. I have no doubt. It's going to get worse. And that means more people are going to need seeds. More people are going to need locally grown food. It's a part of being self-sufficient. It's also a part of nation building, to be honest, because we kind of need to rebuild our nations somehow, right? We need to deal with these crises together. It's not like things got solved and now we're just cruisy. We have to reinvent everything. And let's do that through the lens of bringing things together instead of the lens of things falling apart, because everybody is so entropic these days, and people feel that both socially, in every way, people feel things just falling apart. Well, focus on syntropy, learn what entropy and syntropy is, get your hands in the soil, and be a part of the bringing of things together.
Yeah, I think that's
Yurt Festival.
Exactly.
Yeah. How could and should the Yurt Festival contribute to this, as you say?
Well, it is. It's bringing things together. It's bringing people together who are bringing things together, right? And it's a part of this cultural shift, right? This regenerative culture that we need. And it's amazing that what you guys have done. I was so impressed when I saw the group of people you have there. It literally brings tears to my eyes thinking about it. And then you guys are going to do this every year, and you're going to spread it around the country. It's amazing. And I didn't mention the Nordic Seed Alliance, but this is not just happening here. It's happening around the Nordics. And we're working, on the European level as well. So I think, we just keep making these little islands of coherence, linking them up into a network. And we have responses, lots of them.
Yeah, and I think it's great feedback, and great to hear you say that, because I think we've Daniel and I and others, we're great at sitting around having a beer, talking about the challenges that we face in the world, and painting whatever picture, but it goes back to the point you make, is like, well, what are you going to do about it? And actually you can't control it and you can't really influence it. So what is it that you can do? Well, actually you can control how you respond, and you can control what elements that you can influence in the local community. And I think that was part of the driving force for the idea behind Yord Festival, is very much we need to bring people together, we need to share knowledge. And Daniel and I, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the expertise. We're chancers, for want of a better description, but actually there's some incredible people out there that have been doing this for a really long time, like yourself, like Stephen Barstow, like Andrew, like Richard, that have the knowledge that can add a huge amount of weight and a huge amount of value to people that are interested in these things. They know it's important. I think more and more people can see not necessarily the writings on the wall, but they're becoming more and more aware that world events are becoming quite unsettling, and that's accelerated since COVID times as well. So I think COVID was a bit of a wake-up call to people. But whilst there was a slight potential look of returning to normality, actually in the background it just seems to be getting more and more extreme. And certainly when it comes to food as well, you start looking at the GMO, the food quality, food imports, who's controlling, who's buying up farmland, who's controlling seeds, those types of things. And you look and you're there going, none of it's that great, really. None of it's for the greater good of humanity. It's for the greater good of the few. And so I think these types of events, Yord Festival, and yeah, like I say, your expertise and that we find that inspiring. That's also why we want to put the event on, is actually people like you inspire people like us to do these types of events, because it's we also want to learn and we also want to share the knowledge.
Well, that's that syntropy, right? And when things are syntropic, then you get emergent properties that you couldn't imagine, and you get resonance, which is another thing that most people don't experience very much. Like, that's why people love listening to music, because they feel resonant. But I mean, ecosystems resonant. When you're a part of an ecosystem that's resonating, oh my God, there's nothing close to it. And that's what can happen when you go in this direction.
Where can people find you if they want to follow you closer, or just the quick list, the short list of where?
Well, KVANN.no is our organization. I have a website which needs updating. It's just McMillion.no, which is my last name. And then there is HurdalGjestegård.no, which is where we live. Those would be the three best.
Instagram.
Well. I kind of, when I dropped out of tech, I really had an allergic reaction to it. So I try to minimize all that stuff. I'm not, I'm not perfect, but I really don't want it in my life, just because it's a drain, Yeah. So no, I don't do Instagram. I mean, you can follow me on Facebook, and what you'll get is all my courses. That's what, or some beautiful pictures of the farm, but I don't repost anything, and
Really appreciate your time on this, Andrew. It's great to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to coming down to your farm at some point as well and having a little look around, and obviously really looking forward to seeing you in the summer.
Likewise, it's going to be great. Looking forward to it, and thanks for inviting me. And yeah, amazing.